pride, is regularly used as a positive characteristic in today's culture. Why then is it considered the root of sin in much Christian teaching? Welcome to Thinking Wisely with Dr. Isley, where we learn to live wisely by thinking wisely. This is the second video in a series on the seven deadly sins. You can watch the introductory video, Why the Tradition of the Seven Deadly Sins is Important, by clicking on the link provided below in the description. What do we make of the two ways of understanding pride? The reason for the contrast between a positive use of pride and the biblical one is that they refer to two different attitudes. In the positive sense, to take pride in your work means to care that it is done well and be satisfied when it is successfully completed. When parents are proud of their children, it means that they are glad that their children have done well. Having said that, too often even a positive view of pride takes a negative turn towards arrogance and bravado. Let's look at Christianity's negative view of pride now. The title of the chapter on pride in C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity is The Great Sin. So strongly is the centrality and destructive force of pride felt that it is often listed separately from the seven deadly sins as the source of the others. Gregory the Great, the turn of the 6th century pope and theologian, states that pride is the, quote, queen of sins, end quote, and that the seven are its captains, as pride's first progeny. They spring from this poisonous root, Moralia 31:45. Among modern authors, Rebecca DeYoung, in her excellent book, Glittering Vices, makes the case for understanding pride as the head of the other deadly sins. While both traditions point to pride as the root sin, they clearly are not in agreement about its relationship to the seven deadly sins. As quoted above, Gregory separates pride from the seven. He then places vainglory or vanity in his list of the seven deadly sins. On the other hand, Lewis understands vainglory as a milder form of pride. He then argues that pride is one of the seven, and at the same time the root of the other six. Seems to me attributing to pride a kind of double duty, as Lewis does, can muddy the waters. Also, while recognizing the close relationship between pride and vanity, there is a legitimate distinction between the two. Therefore, in this presentation, Gregory's ancient practice will be followed. Pride will be interpreted as the root of all the seven sins, and vainglory will be included as one of the seven. What then is pride? Pride can be defined as an exaggerated sense of one's importance and accomplishments. Exaggerated speaks to pride as a false conception and error. It is thus a sin against the truth. As a false view of ourself, it relates directly to who we are. As a false view of our accomplishments, it relates to what we do. Furthermore, pride's focus on the self results in sin against God and neighbor. The Apostle Paul's most systematic presentation of the gospel is found in Romans. In order to show humanity's need for the gospel, Paul describes the nature and devastating consequences of sin in Romans 1:18 to 3:20. He contends that the fundamental sin we humans commit is suppressing the truth about God and becoming idolaters. Romans 1:18 to 25. In the extensive catalog of sins that follows, humans are said to be, among other things, insolent, haughty, boastful. 130. It is important to note that these three biblical words relating to pride come on the heels of the statement that sinful men are haters of God. In fact, cognates of the last two of our three words from Romans 1:30, haughty and boastful, are used by Paul in 2 Timothy 3:2 to describe the proud and the arrogant who are lovers of self and not lovers of God, verse 4. Paul's understanding of pride as rejecting the truth about God and self reflects the story of the fall in Genesis 3, which was probably in the mind of the apostle when he wrote Romans. The main thrust of the serpent's attack on the woman concerns truth. In verse 1, he calls into question God's command prohibiting the man and the woman from eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? He then explicitly denies the truthfulness of God's warning that they will die if they eat of it in verse 4. You will not surely die. Denial of the truth of God and His Word leads to the denial of the truth of the woman's humanity. Excuse me. This was already implicit in the disavowal that she would die from disobeying God, as if humanity could live apart from God the Creator. In verse 5, the serpent claims that the reason for the prohibition was that she was a threat to God's supremacy. She would be like God, knowing good and evil. However, knowing good and evil is God's prerogative as the sovereign Lord, as verse 22 makes clear in Genesis 3. For example, the expression good and evil is used to describe David's and Solomon's authority as kings of Israel to decide what is right and wrong and judge cases in 2 Samuel 14:17 and 1 Kings 3:9. These other biblical passages of the phrase support the interpretation that the temptation was to reject God's authority to define good and evil, or to exercise moral autonomy. She would be like God in the sense that she could determine for herself what is good and evil. As always, the good and the truth are perverted by evil, since being like God was the very nature of the human person as his image, but not in the twisted sense that the serpent claimed. Thus, this is the essential nature of the sin of pride, to deny the truth about who God is and who we are. The consequences inevitably follow. There is shame, as sinful humans recognize that their pride is a sham that must be hidden from others and ultimately even from themselves. Their hiding from God in Genesis 3 and being afraid of Him demonstrates the rupture in the relationship with God that pride causes. Human relationships are also spoiled by pride as they refuse to accept responsibility for their actions and blame one another or each other, verses 9 and 10. And it ends in a power struggle between the man and the woman for dominance, verse 16. The breakdown in social relations, detailed by Paul in Romans 1:28 to 31, is vividly portrayed in Genesis 4 by Cain's murder of Abel in verse 8 and Lamech's violence and boasting that his vengeance is greater than God's, verses 23 to 4. On a corporate or national level, pride's foolish challenge to God is exemplified in the story of the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11:1 to 9, in which the people sought to build a tower with its top in the heavens and to make a name for themselves, verse 4. As was said before, pride can be defined as an exaggerated sense of one's importance and accomplishments, a sin against the truth. In opposition to pride, the Bible counsels humility. Biblical humility is to think neither too lowly nor too highly of oneself. Os Guinness's Steering Through the Chaos, page 62, aptly states that humility is rather a form of clear-sightedness. It is realism about ourselves plus trust in God. Humility is committed to the truth about who we are and to proper relationships. Evagrius, a 4th century monk, whose writing perhaps gave origin to the idea of the deadly sins, describes the consequences of pride in Practicas, chapter 14. His description helps to identify both what humility is and also its relationship to the biblical triad of faith, hope, and love. Quote, the demon of pride conducts the soul to its worst fall, end quote. Pride urges the soul not to admit God's help and to believe that the soul is responsible for its own achievements. and to disdain the brethren as fools because they do not all see this about it. A proud person does not want to admit that he is a creature made in the image of God, as Genesis 1:26 and 27 states. Faith, on the other hand, confesses the truth of what and who we are. As creatures, we are dependent upon God. We need God's help to accomplish anything worthwhile, and to overcome our sins. Thus, He, not we, is ultimately responsible for our achievements. Humility fosters a proper relationship of trust in God. As we trust in His wisdom, we experience the beauty of His person and begin to learn to love Him, which is at the core of the first and great commandment to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Mark 12:30, also Deuteronomy 6:5. The humble person recognizes that who he is and what he has accomplished is by God's grace. This humility leads to gratitude to God. Humility also results in proper relationships with others. As we realize and rejoice in who we are as God's creatures, we desire His praise and seek His glory, not our own. We do not need to boast in who we are, and above all, we are not to arrogantly disdain others for supposedly not seeing how great we are. Humility recognizes that one's accomplishments result from the help of others and promotes gratitude for them. Thus, a true view of ourselves leads to obedience to the second commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves, Mark 12:31 and Leviticus 19:18. Not only do we love our neighbor because God commands us to do so, we also love others because we recognize who they are in truth, made in the image of God just like us. The humility to see ourselves as we are and others as they are inextricably ties the love of our neighbors to the love of God. Finally, humility's true view of the self engenders hope. No longer nagged by the hidden doubts stemming from the false pretensions of pride, or even overwhelmed with guilt at failing to live up to the lies we or others have created about ourselves, we joyfully accept that we are, quote, fearfully and wonderfully made, end quote, Psalm 139. We are shaped by God, the master artist. We understand, too, that our destiny is not to continue to be racked with sin and guilt. Instead, we know that, quote, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when He, Jesus, appears, we shall be like Him, because we shall see Him as He is. And everyone who thus hopes in Him purifies himself even as He is pure. End quote. 1 John 3:2-3. We shall fulfill our true nature as the image of God, bearing the image of the man from heaven, Jesus Christ, the image of the invisible God. In summary, pride is the captain of the other deadly sins because it denies the truth about ourselves and our accomplishments and leads to sin against God, ourselves, and our neighbor. Pride is countered by humility, but recognizing our inability, we can overcome pride and be humble only by God's grace. Next, we shall tackle pride's pitiful little sister, vainglory or vanity. As always, comments are welcome. If you want to receive these videos, automatically click on the subscribe button below. Thank you for listening.